Morning. My Nuffield study was sponsored by the Worshipful Company of Butchers and looked at how beef production can adapt to changes in global demand and food culture. I visited 11 countries over a 14-week period, and this also included a 7-week participation in the International Global Focus Programme, more of which later. And to be honest, looking at this map, the air miles haven't really helped the beef industry's carbon footprint. And I've got blood clots in my legs, but you can't have everything. So my main questions were, number one, where in the world will future consumer demand for beef come from? Number two, who will supply this demand and with what production techniques? And number three, where does the UK fit into this jigsaw? In China and Hong Kong, I learned how the younger generation are beginning to favour beef over pork and chicken, and how by 2020, East Coast China will be just as expensive as Europe. As well as possessing an insatiable appetite for offal cuts like tripe, there has been a proliferation of upmarket steakhouses and retail outlets. A message from meat traders, trade commissioners and retailers I talked to was that more resources and more people on the ground from the UK are required to break into this market, as well as sustained political backing and frequent trade missions. In the United States and Canada, I learned how in recent times consumers have largely accepted large-scale industrialised beef production, but are now beginning to question the use of growth hormones and question an intensive system that suffers from E. coli outbreaks. There can be no ambiguity with traceability, and there is no future for a system where cattle ID is voluntary in the US, and any black cattle, like this black Limousin steer, can qualify for the certified Angus brand in the US. In Brazil, I learnt there are 200 million people, 200 million cattle, and only 20% of production is exported. Brazilians eat an incredible amount of beef, and yet are still the world's biggest beef exporter, alongside Australia. So beef exporters around the world are focused on the growing export opportunities to places like Southeast Asia, where affluence is growing, but are also honing in on mature markets with high prices like the UK and Europe. So how will this demand be met? In the United States and Canada, I studied large-scale intensive feedlot systems in Colorado and Alberta. They've developed since the 1950s. I visited feedlots of 100,000 cattle and slaughterhouses that were killing 5,400 cattle a day. It was impossible not to be impressed by the efficiency, scale, and attention to detail. Innovative cattle ownership models were widely used, and the risk management and use of research and development were highly advanced. For example, this DNA ear tag samples every animal arriving on this particular feedlot. I also studied extensive grassland systems as a comparison. In Canada, I visited mob graziers in Alberta and Saskatchewan. It seems pretty much every single Nuffield scholar has visited Neil Dennis in Saskatchewan. In Brazil, I looked at Nelore and Angus cattle grazing extensive pasture land, and an innovative system at the Embrapa Research Institute that integrates eucalyptus tree plantations with crop and grazing rotations. In Uruguay, I travelled through the extensive natural grasslands that were home to predominantly Hereford and Angus cattle. Here you see natural grasslands on the left and a farm on the right that had implemented rotational style grazing practices copied from the New Zealand dairy industry. Uruguay has 3.3 million people, 11.3 million cattle, and has increased beef exports since the 1980s from 30% to 66% of production, to a point where they now account for 21% of global beef exports. Uruguay is foot-and-mouth free, BSE free, and has been hormone free since 1962. All cattle are electronically tagged at birth, and a black box traceability system tracks cattle from field to fork. All meat boxes for domestic and export markets carry exactly the same logo, the logo on the bottom here, every single box. Everyone in the supply chain, the producer, the processor, the retailer, the Uruguay Meat Institute, INAC, and the government all work together for the common good. This is a small country punching way above its weight by coordinating and collaborating in a well-organised way. They have, in effect, successfully marketed the whole country as a brand that combines a simple but powerful message. Angus and Hereford cattle grazed extensively on natural grassland in Uruguay. It is region-specific, it is breed-specific, it is grassland-specific. So having studied consumer demand and production supply, the conclusion I came to was that production will gravitate to where cost of production is lowest and most sustainable. So where is this? Well, when I was travelling in Brazil, the new Pope had just been unveiled, and he was, of course, Argentinian. Now, you can imagine, the Brazilians weren't too happy about this. So everywhere I went, Brazilians said to me, yeah, well, Pope may be Argentinian, but God is Brazilian. And I could kind of see why. Brazil has an amazing productive capacity. It has rainfall, sunshine, land, labour and energy resources, and of course samba. However, here in the UK we have subsidised Morris dancing, so watch out Brazil. This is a picture of a 1,000 hectare field of cotton. Another 2 crops will be planted in this field in a calendar year. Whilst in Brazil, I also met a New Zealander called Simon Wallace. He had scoured the globe to find the optimum location for agricultural production. He ultimately agreed that God was indeed Brazilian and bought 5,000 hectares of land in the Bahia region of Brazil to produce milk using a philosophy of islands of production in a sea of conservation. Within the 5,000 hectare sea of conservation, circular irrigation pivots 58 hectares in size were erected with a milking parlour in the centre. Each 58 hectare pivot carried 600 dairy cows that moved on to a fresh grazing segment following each milking, with the irrigator following the cows round as they go. 6 of these 600 cow irrigation pivots had been set up. He had plans for another 15. Each 600 cow herd was run as an autonomous unit by a Brazilian family. A school and community centre had also been built on the site for the families, and also an on-site factory had been built to process the milk into a high-quality branded UHT product for the undersupplied and growing dairy market in the increasingly cosmopolitan urban markets. Nearby, Sao Paulo has a population of 20 million people. It's the largest city in the southern hemisphere. And the other great thing about UHT products, they don't need refrigeration, which makes production, transport and storage extremely efficient. Islands of production in a sea of conservation. A really interesting concept, I think, and maybe something that can make farming in the uplands more viable without subsidy here in the UK. I also visited Moy Park in Northern Ireland to learn why chicken has been so successful in the last 30 years, whilst beef has flatlined in mature markets. Chicken is lean, low in cholesterol, easy to cook and cheap to buy. It is a much more efficient converter of feed into meat than beef and is export and consumer focused, whereas beef tends to be animal and farmer focused. I met with Eric Reed, one of the founding fathers at Moy Park, and he thought there were 7 main reasons for their success. And I think there are 3 main reasons the UK beef industry needs to implement from this list. The first, I reckon, is innovation. The second is partnerships. And the third is be the best. So what's the future for the UK beef industry? Well, there are many disadvantages of farming on a small, wet island like the UK. But we can grow grass, and it's the cheapest ruminant feed out there. When times are tough, the production systems with the lowest cost can sustain themselves the longest. We need well-managed rotational grazing systems in the beef sector to maximise the growth potential of both the grass and the cattle. We possess the fantastic asset of being home to 2 of the most widely used and best branded breeds in the world, Angus and Hereford. We need the attention to detail and forward-thinking cattle ownership models and research and development of the North American feedlots. And we need the integrated systems of the poultry industry and the traceability of Uruguay. We are lucky to have 60 million affluent people on our doorstep here in the UK. and another 300 million in the EU on our doorstep, as well as growing export markets for offal. I was also fortunate to be awarded additional sponsorship to fill the only UK place on the Global Focus programme run by Nuffield International. The GFP was something quite extraordinary, and it took an already amazing Nuffield experience onto a whole other level for me. Travelling for a sustained 7-week period with 9 other people from 4 different countries was a richly intense experience and proved to be a seminal journey that will remain with all of us forever. It's really only after a few weeks away that you have gained enough distance from your normal life to truly drill down to a deeper way of looking at things. The 10 of us ran 10 very different farming operations at home. Everything from bananas to beef, sugarcane to sheep, avocados to dairy cows. We all looked at the same things and saw 10 different angles to discuss and debate. We travelled to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the US, Mexico and Brazil, and looked at innovation and best practice in everything from coffee plantations to almond processing and back again, and talked to a range of farmers, trade ambassadors, politicians, research institutes and more besides. By the end of 7 weeks, we were a band of brothers that would be friends for life. Since returning from my travels, I've spoken at conferences both home and abroad, and my experiences have informed my contributions to the NFU Livestock Board and other organisations I'm involved with. On-farm changes I've made include establishing custom feeding arrangements with various retail partners, implementing a more hardcore rotational grazing system, and I'm in the process of establishing a real-time online cattle auction business. I've also introduced a Dragon's Den style business partner into the business after noticing, especially in North America, that a common trait of successful business people was having a mentor. My dragon makes all the coffee cups for Costa Coffee, amongst other things. I've also taken on board something an Aussie beef farmer said to me. If you're doing 500 cattle, well, you know, you might as well do 1,000, because it doesn't take much more to do once you're up and running. And if you're doing 1,000, well, you might as well do 5,000 because, well, it doesn't take much more to do once you're up and running. You know what you're doing. And if you're doing 5,000, you might as well do 10,000, and so on. And that's how they think. I'd like to thank the Nuffield organisation and everyone who gave me their time and hospitality on my travels, and especially all the 2012 and 2013 scholars for just being ace, really. And I'd like to thank my family and friends for all their amazing support during a period of time that's seen both highs and lows, and my sponsor, the Worshipful Company at Butchers, for all their help and support, and especially Bob Bansback, who has given unstinting and constant help to me. And also a huge thank you to Roger Mercer for his faith and support for sponsoring me on the Global Focus programme. And I hope this programme is something that can be more widely adopted in the UK in the years to come. Thank you.